Project and Educulture Project, which are two educational initiatives housed here on the farm. And I'm here talking in front of you because none of the farmers would. I've been working all day, and I had a hard time twisting some Suyematsu arms to help me out here too. So in my role as educator, I'm happy to use my voice to kind of get things started. First of all, I'd just like to say that this is a day of remembering. And we're here to remember this day 70 years ago in which the Suyematsu family and all the other Japanese people of Japanese ancestry and Japanese Americans on Bainbridge Island were forced to leave the island. As a matter of fact, about this hour, they were probably on a Pullman train heading from here down to California. The ferry left around 11 o'clock in the morning. And this is the only place today on the tour that you will actually be able to stand at the site where a family was picked up by a U.S. Army truck and brought down to the Bainbridge ferry to enter exile, not knowing where they were going, where they were heading, what conditions. The WRA frequently asked questions guide that the Army gave out told them to prepare for pioneer-like conditions. So when you consider this being a pioneer family, and expect anywhere between below freezing temperatures and above 110 degrees. So when you think about only what you could carry, that's the basic instructions. There's actually the whole list of the WRA instruction Q&A is right here if you want to see it. So this is really about remembering, and we're glad all of you are here. I just want to say a few thank yous before we get going. And the chief thank you goes to this wonderful person to my left here who has been moonlighting for the last 3 weeks as a junior curator and took what was a kind of house that needed a lot of cleaning up, let's just say that, and not only cleaned it up, but in the process of doing that, has uncovered all of these treasures. Almost everything you see in this room, aside from a few family heirlooms that have been around for a while, have just literally been uncovered in the last 2 or 3 weeks. Oh, wow. So, Karen, thank you for helping bring this place to life. And what initially started as just the idea of coming to the farm on this day turned into what if we could get people in the house, and that turned into this mini museum that you see here. So, thank you, Karen.
Way to go, Karen.
And Karen had a lot of help from a lot of the other farmers here on the island, as well as people here and friends, and so I just want to thank everybody else for pitching in to make today happen. I want to thank the Suyematsu family for being here. If you're a Suyematsu family member, can you raise your hand? Come on, folks, come on in, don't be bashful. Do you want to introduce yourself? This is...
I'm Maki's sister, Eiko.
And on March 30th, 1942, you were how old?
11.
13. You were 7th grade.
Yeah, 7th grade. What's 13?
The record's right here. You were 13. Your older brother Yosh was 14. Toshio was 16. Isamu was 18, Akio was 19, Kimiko was 20. Your parents were 46 and 57, respectively. So, some other family members who just introduce yourselves?
I was Curtis Suyematsu, I'm a nephew, so I wasn't there then.
Okay, other family members? Come on, Carl.
I'm Meiko's son.
Where's Dean?
Right there.
Dean's hiding too. Dean wrote an article for the Bainbridge Island Japanese American Communities newsletter. It's the blue newsletter you have. It's a full history of the Suyematsu families in there to read. And we also have some other people who were here on the island on this day in 1942. Would you like to introduce your husband?
Oh, my husband Zenji Shibayama.
And your family lived what part of the island?
North.
The north part of the island. And you were how old on March 30th?
We lived by Bainbridge Garden there, the house right
Gardens.
across.
Okay. And on March 30th, how old were you? 1942, when you left the island?
But he didn't go to camp.
Oh, that's right. Your family went to
Moses Lake.
with one of 3 families that went to Moses Lake. Any other people? I see. Okay.
Hardly.
Bob, can we put you on the spot for a second? In 1942, there was no day road because there was no name for this road. There was a day corner up the hill here. The Suyematsu family lived here. The Day family lived up the street a little bit on the north side of the road, and the Oliver family lived just south. These were Bob Oliver was Akio's classmate. Akio and Bob were in the class of 42. Their pictures are up here on the wall. And Akio was, these Olivers were the Suyematsu family neighbors. More or less. Yeah, when you could scream as loud as you could and no one could hear you.
And I picked strawberries for the Suyematsu for 2 years.
Akio's classmate.
Akio's sister. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. We met at that 2006 on that reunion. Yeah, I'll say hello to you. Maybe we didn't exactly meet.
We'll give you a chance to catch up. So a little bit of context, just to sort of set the scene. This farm was started in 1928. The Suyematsu family actually rented land up the hill where Wilkes is for about 10 years or so. And also had rented land previous to that over at Sunrise. So they bought land here. This house was built by the Suyematsu family with the help of some other Japanese families. So, you know, without an architect, without a realtor, without a builder, this is literally a pioneer house. The house's western edge went to the wall. You can see the wall right there. This was an addition in the 1960s. So when you walk through the house, you're walking through a pioneer house that 8 people lived in. That time, 1942, only 10 acres of this 40-acre farm had been cleared. So if you look out that window and you can just look straight west, there's this strip of 10 acres. So the north end of the farm was what had been cleared by then. The rest was all forest. Was there running water in your house in 1942? Okay. Electricity?
No.
No.
Okay.
We didn't have it either.
So there were 8 Suyematsu family members. There were actually, you had a young sibling that passed away in early childhood, so there were 7 siblings. And then 6 children remaining, 2 daughters and 4 sons. You lived in the house downstairs or upstairs?
No, downstairs,
With your parents? Okay, and the boys slept upstairs?
It's an attic, like.
So
No,
imagine
it's
6,
just one
8
big
people
room.
living in this house without this addition. It took, let's see, all the timber that left this farm. There's an interesting oral interview with Akio about all the land that was cleared. It took to clear, and the people who agreed to take the timber were going to pay the Suyematsu family, and the Suyematsu family never got paid for all the wood that left this farm. At that time, also, it's important to note that the Grange was restricted. So people of color were not invited to the Grange, which was down the street here at that time, and Akio tells some interesting stories about that. But this was very much of an island community, and neighbors helped neighbors, and it's important to remember there was no 305 at the time in terms of just people getting around the island. People, like the Suyematsu will tell you how tough life was here. Akio often tells me that some of the best fish they could afford to have were dogfish, which was a chum that was fed to fishermen used for fishing. And that at that time was the best food that the family could have. And like many families, they really pioneered their way up through the war. You built your own home, we talked about that. At this time, there were berry farmers that growing boysenberries and blackcaps and about 8 different varieties of strawberries. Akio tells the story of when he was 10 years old, he knew how to drive the team of horses that the family had out the driveway, up what's now Day Road to the top where Wilkes was, where they were farming. And at dusk, he could send the horses home by themselves down Day Road. They'd be waiting for him in the barn when he got home, and he would walk home after As a senior, Akio was part of a woodshop class with a teacher named Mr. Morley, and back then, part of woodshop class meant building a real home. And there's a house on Moran Avenue that Akio and his classmates built just before he left the island. And there's a letter from Akio's teacher giving him credit for that class, which allowed him to graduate before he left the island. There are lots of other stories to tell you. What's also interesting to note, we have some articles here from the review at that time. And there's an article here about the fellow who owned the strawberry packing plant was trying to make a case to the government not to have all the Japanese farmers leaving. At that time, the island produced 3.5 million pounds of strawberries. All of them grown by Japanese farmers. And we also have an article that talks about there were 750 acres farmed in production by 1,890 persons during the harvest season on the island at that time. The Suyematsus, along with almost all the other berry farmers on the island, were 3 or 2 months away from the largest bumper crop they would have ever had in almost all the years they were here on the island. The first time that most of the families would have even ever turned a profit, let alone broke even. and were forced to leave in March, a few years before that bumper crop. Some families had others to help them, and some didn't. This farm, for the most part, was not tended to during the war, but the Suyematsu family did come back. Akio was drafted at the end of the war in 1945 and had to stay in Europe until 1947 and didn't come back and join his family, but then reclaimed the farm, and I think we all know the rest of the story. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us about life before the war in this house on this farm?
Well, all I remember is that I remember them clearing the land and using all this dynamite. And I used to be very afraid, you know, when I heard all these blasting.
We used to get some rocks on the roof.
And I remember the dirt road. And then when I used to go to school, then they used to pick up, you know, my classmates. And I used to envy them because they had such beautiful homes. And someday I thought, wow, that'd be really... And I noticed those things like that. But I always kept to myself, and I didn't come home and, you know, rant and rave or anything that they have better homes or things like that. But, those are, and then I like school because if I didn't go to school, I have to work. So I always look forward to the first day of school, and when vacation time comes around, I thought, oh no. Get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and get out there and pick berries, you know, all day. And
Pick up rocks.
Someone asked Bob the other day when he was visiting whether he and Appa used to hang out after school, and Bob's response was,
Hang out. Work to do.
you know, Aki was never available to hang out because he was always working around the farm after school with the rest of the family.
yeah, because some of them help us pick berries.
Oh yeah, I picked berries for 2 years, yeah.
Oh, you did?
2 years. Made $31 one month, $52 the second year. I got better the second year. I was 7 a.m. to 5 p.m.
Yeah.
So one of the wonderful things that happened, there are many wonderful stories of good acts of good conscience amongst neighbors in this community. There are stories of neighbors who bought a family farm for $1, sold it back to the family for $1 after the war. There was still a mortgage, as you understand, on this property of sorts after the war, and the mortgage holder said to the family, as long as you pay the interest in the time you were away, the house is still yours.